Hello and welcome back to Purus Tech Java tutorials. And in this session, we are going to cover very important topic of Java, that is Java exceptions. Okay, so let's start here. Let's go to our IntelliJ, and I have a program that is try catch exception example here. So let's start. So this program illustrates how to catch an exception and how to handle the exception. So basically exceptions are nothing but your unwanted event which occurs at the runtime. Okay, so let's start with the main method. I have defined an array, that is integer array. So here there are 4 elements. Now I have a method that is get value by index position, which takes the array as an input, and the index for which index I want to get the element, right? Let's say here if I'll pass 4, that means 0, 1, 2, 3. So fourth element is not there. Let's just modify this one to 3. So if I'll just say 3, then third element will be returned. So in this case 13 will get returned. Let's just comment out this try catch and everything, so that will come to this later. So here I have commented the try catch. Okay, so in this method what is happening? So from the input array we just fetch the position, and then we get this element in an integer type variable, and then we return from this particular method. So here in this example I assume that we have an application, and in that application some date are stored in an array, and I want to fetch these dates by using the indexes. Now if I'll run this program, let's change this to 4 also. Now if I'll just run this program here, then I should get 13, right? So here it returned 13. If I'll pass 1 here, that means I should fetch 11. Let's run and see. This is 11. So as it is working. Let's say in case of any programmatic error, any of the developer just gave some index which is not at all existing in this particular array, then what happens? Let's see. If I'll run this one, I'm getting some exception. See here. So this exception is called array index out of bound exception. Now this is an unwanted event which happened during the run of this particular program. Now let's talk about how many kinds of unwanted event or your exception can happen. So there are 3 kinds of unwanted event that can happen in our application. One is error type, second is exception type. So in this exception type there are 2 types. One is your runtime exception, and except runtime exception whatever it comes, these are called the compile time exception. So this compile time exception examples are like this. Under the exception we can have the checked exception. So all the exception except the runtime exception are the checked exception. So these exception, for example, are the checked exception, and these exception are called the unchecked exception. We will come to this after some time. So let's go back here to the program. This array index out of bound exception is the runtime exception. As we see here, right, in this runtime exception, array index out of bound. So array index out of bound is a child class of index out of bound exception. So this is the runtime exception. You don't need to catch these runtime exception in your code. So when you get any exception in your application, you need to handle it. To handle, Java provides a try catch statements. This is what I had written, try and then catch. There is one more keyword, that is finally. We will come to this why this is used. So we can handle this exception by using try, catch and finally. Even you can handle it by using throws clause. Now basically this runtime exception you don't need to catch it, and this runtime exception is caused by your wrong coding or your wrong input to the application or your program. So here the input is 8 and this 8th index is not at all there in the array, because of which we are getting this particular exception. Now let's see one of the example of the checked exception, which is the exception apart from the runtime exception. These are the left hand sides here. So this kind of exception are called the checked exception. Let's see one of the example here. Let's say I want to read some file content. So here private read file content and just say void here file equal to new of file. Let's say which file we want to read. So these actually reading files and writing files, this comes into different section of Java. So we will come to that part later on. So just for illustrating the checked exception, we are going to take this example. We need to import this file here. So control space file.io and we need to pass which file I need to read. So here I have file data to read.txt. I'll just use this one. So here I can pass the path of the file, right click, copy path. So we can take the absolute path from the beginning. Let's take this one and paste it here. Now let's take file reader equal to new of file reader and then pass this file here. And here you will find there is a compilation error saying that it is an unhandled exception. So unhandled exception, this kind of compilation error comes when we use some method or a constructor which throws the checked exception. So checked exception are checked during the compilation of the program. So this is why I'm getting here file not found unhandled exception. So what I need to do, I need to handle this one. So how I can handle this one? That we can handle in two ways. One is either using throws clause and second is using the try catch. So if I'll use throws clause, I need to handle the exception in the callee method. Whoever will call this method, I need to handle. So let's just use this one and let's just comment this out as of now. So let's make this as static so that we can access this one in the main method. Here let's call this method read file content, and here you will see the compilation problem of, again, it is unhandled exception. So you need to handle in the main method. Since in this method you did not handle and simply you throws this exception to the callee method. Whoever calls is called the callee method, and in this method you need to handle this one. So you need to either wrap this one into a try catch, or again you can put a throws clause here. Throws file not found exception. Now who calls this main method? So main method is called by your JVM. So this exception will be caught by your JVM. So this is one way of handling the exception. Let's see the try catch also here. So here there are other logics to read the file content. We'll come to this when I will explain about the try with resources. Now let's use the try catch block instead of throws clause. So let's just delete this one, and here also let's just delete this. And here again you will see the compilation error. So let's take the second approach. As you can see, by clicking on try catch block, I got this try and catch statements, and here it is handling by using the catch block. Now here we can write sysout exception occurred during file reading. And here I can print the exception stack trace by using this method print stack trace. So this print stack trace is defined in the throwable.java. As I shown you here, throwable is the parent of all kind of exception, and this method is defined in this throwable class. So there are multiple methods which are defined, which gives us the details about the exception. So mostly e dot get message and e dot get cause. So this particular methods are used. Let's delete this, and here let's write sysout file is read. So this is how we can handle the exception, that is a checked exception, by using the try and catch block. So let's just try to run this program and see what happens. See here the file is read is coming in the output. Now let's say this particular file itself, it does not exist. Then what happens here? Let's try to just rename this to data to read 1, which is not at all there in this path. And let's run this program and see what happens. As you can see here, this exception occurred during file reading. So this particular statement is coming into picture because we got an exception and we have given this catch block to handle that kind of particular situation. So here we have handled, and here what we are doing is we are writing. So basically in normal application, a single 2-line statements or 3-line statement, it won't be there, and there should be some other alternative to this particular logic should be there. Let's say this file is not there, then maybe from the database we read the configuration, maybe some from the XML we'll read the configuration, or somewhere else. So that kind of handling comes into picture in case of this kind of exception in the application. So here I have just print out this one, and I have printed what kind of exception it is. So it will print the stack trace. Stack trace is nothing but from where this method is being called. So all those information will be here. Start from the down, calling happens, and the exact source of information, so where exactly the exception came, you should see the first one. So the first statement, it is saying there is a native method. So this native methods are implemented by using your operating system languages. And the second statement you are getting, this is the file input stream. So this is one of the class which is already there in JDK. If you click here, you will see exactly this point we are getting the exception. That is the file not found exception. So it is clearly saying that whatever we have given the path, it does not exist. So this is the JDK file. Now you should always trace to your application specific Java file. So which is my application specific Java file? This one, right? The first statement, if you could just come down from the top, the first statement which states your own Java file, that is the point where exactly error came. So exactly error came here, and this line is throwing the exception, and we have handled by using this catch block, and we have written some statements what to do after this exception. So these statements we have written what to do if we find such kind of exception. Now let's say in your application there are multiple statements inside the try block. So these statements may throw some more checked exception. So in that case, you can write multiple catch blocks here. Let's say for example, SQL exception. Okay. So ideally SQL exception is being used where the program connects to the databases. So here it is saying delete the catch for this one because we don't have any code here, but if any code is there here which may throw this particular exception, you can write one more catch block. Even you can have multiple catch blocks here. Let's delete this. Let's go back to our get value by index position, uncomment this one, uncomment this one, and we have seen that by passing this 8 index, I'm getting the exception here. Let's just rerun it and get the exception. Then we'll see how to handle this kind of exception. So array index out of bound exception, as I told earlier that this kind of exception are unchecked exception. The compiler does not check this kind of exception, and all this exception comes under the runtime exception, which is shown here, the runtime exception. Now let's say if you want to handle this exception, you need to explicitly do a try and catch. But basically this kind of exception is a bug, so you need to resolve. Just for example here, let's just handle this one. So here you need to put a try block and then catch sysout. You can say invalid index received index position. Okay, now let's run this one. So here need to put index array index out of bound exception and just give a reference variable, and then now let's just run this program. As you can see, the exception, whatever array index out of bound exception, it is not at all appearing in this statements because I have handled it by using the catch block. Now let's put one more statement after the catch block, sysout after the catch block. So if we will not handle this particular exception, that is the runtime exception, what will happen is your program will exit as soon as your exception will come into picture, and it will not go forward further. So let's just again comment this one, all this, though I could have done by using the block comments. Okay, so this particular statement, as you can see, this is after this particular statement. So exactly we remember that in this position the exception comes. So your program will not go further and it won't actually execute this particular statement if we don't handle this one. Let's remove these things and let's come to the finally block, why this is used. So basically finally block should be used in this particular sequence, like first try, then catch, and then finally. You cannot write any of the statements before to this finally. Let's say for example here. So this finally statement should be there as soon as your catch blocks over. So let's just delete this one. Now let's come to this finally block. What is the use of this? Finally block will execute always whether your this particular statement throws the exception or it doesn't throw the exception. As we know that this statements whatever is there inside the catch block is called whenever there is an exception. So what if we want to call some statements whether the exception comes or the exception doesn't come from the try block? So in that case, we need to use the finally. For example, let's just try. Let's just run this program. As you can see in finally block, it is appearing in case of exception also. So it has come to the exception, it has printed this particular statement, and then it has run this finally block. Let's try to give some valid input. Let's say 2 and here 2 and try to run this program. You will see here now in finally block and after catch block. So this particular statement is getting printed, even this particular statement, whereas this particular statement is not at all printing because we are not getting any exception out of this. So finally block is always executed irrespective of whether there is an exception or there is no exception out of this particular statements, whichever is there in the try block. So this final block is mostly used to close the resources. Resources in the sense some connection to the database, file output, file input. So all those things will come into the resources section. So we'll come to the resources in one more example. And here let's just correct this one to make this console clear. Now there is one more case. Let's say in your program for multiple exception you want to have the same logic. Then you can have a single catch block and then your exception in this catch block separated by your pipe symbol. And here whatever exception, let's say another exception, Sql exception, and then E, and define this logic so that we can reduce this duplication of code. If the logic is different, then you can have different catch block. Okay, so let's move to one more topic, that is try with resources. So here is the example of try with resource, and here I have taken the file path, whatever file I had created here in this particular path, and full path I have copy pasted, and here I have a method called read file content which reads the file by using the path, and this path is being utilized by your file reader, and this file reader is ultimately used by your buffer reader. So this is one of the logic to read the file content. So there are multiple logics are there in JDK or your Java. We'll come to those section later on. So just for illustrating the try with resources, I have taken this example. And in this finally block, you need to close the resources. What are the resources I'm using? I'm using this BR, buffer reader, and the file reader. So this has to be closed in the finally section. Why we are closing in the finally section? Because if we will close after this try block, let's say here, then what might happen is in this statement your exception may occur and it may not flow down. That is why whether exception occur or exception doesn't occur, we need to run this two statements. So I have kept these two statements in the finally block. Again, you will see there is a try and catch block here because this particular close methods throws exception. Just control and just mouse over, it will show that it throws some exception, IO exception. So I need to handle this one. So to handle this, I have written the catch block inside the finally block itself. Okay, this is what exactly similar to the previous example. Now what is try with resources is we should just use our resources inside this try block. For example, here I have, let's just comment this one. And here I need to remove this particular declaration, and I can remove this br.close from here. Even this one I don't require. Okay, so this has become one of the example of try with resource. Here I'm just utilizing this try block to close this particular resource, that is buffer reader will be closed as soon as your try block finishes with execution or without the execution. So this is latest approach of closing the resources. So we should use wherever it is applicable. So what all we can close in the try with resources? The classes which implements the closable interface. So let's just control and click here, and this particular buffer reader is extending the reader class. Just control and click the reader. You will find that it is implementing the closable interface. So you cannot use any class which is not implementing the closable interface inside the try with resources. Now there is one more resource which is the file reader. Let's see whether this is implementing the closable interface or not. Yes, this is implementing. So we can use the file reader even here like this. Let's say Control X and then file reader, then next line, and here I can just cut this part and here paste it. So let's just copy this one and pass it here. Now I don't need this statement and I don't need this particular try block and catch block here, and just I can delete this and I can just remove this finally block. Yeah, so here I'm utilizing two resources in the try with resource separated by semicolon. Let's run this program and see the output. Yeah, it has printed welcome my friends, which is there inside the file. Okay, let's come to the error type of exception or your unwanted event. So all this kind of errors, out of memory error and stack overflow error, this kind of things, when it comes, we cannot handle this. This is a system error and the JVM exit after this kind of error. Thanks for watching this video and stay tuned.